If you would like to support the efforts and research we are doing here on this podcast, please go to podcast.discoveringyourmind.com and become a monthly supporter. We greatly appreciate your support. Thank you. Aphantasia is a condition characterized by an inability to visualize mental images in one's mind. If you have just discovered that you or someone you love has aphantasia, or if you're just fascinated by the subject in general and love learning more about it, you are in the right place. The Discovering Your Mind podcast delves into all aspects of the mind's eye, including aphantasia, hyperphantasia, and everything in between. Welcome to the Discovering Your Mind podcast, brought to you by shanesbraindomain.com. I am your host, Shane Williams, also known as Shane's Brain. As I interview various people for this podcast, many times they will ask me questions about what is going on or not going on in my mind. I have not included much of those conversations because I want the focus to be on their experiences, not mine. However, at this time I would like to play for you some of those questions and conversations from the past guests in an effort to try and explain Shane's brain. It's difficult for me to explain what's happening in my mind, and like others, my explanations evolve as time goes on. I'm going to play excerpts from 3 conversations, one with Karen Hyatt, one with Justin Tershonsky, and one with Sarah Pett. After each one, I will comment on the information and add additional thoughts. All right, here we go.
What do you see in your, if someone says, picture an apple, do you just see what's in front of you and there's nothing, or does your brain try to dredge up a picture of an apple, or what happens?
So I know this is hard to understand to people whose thoughts manifest themselves as images, but my thoughts do not, but they're still thoughts. Okay, so I would think of an apple, but in no way would it manifest itself visually at all. It's just a vague, distant thought of an apple. That's all it is. It's all still there. I still have thoughts. Even before I knew I couldn't picture things, I still said those words because I thought they were figures of speech. And so it still, in my mind, adequately describes what's happening. A lot of times I still do it all the time. Oh, I can see that, or I can hear that, even though I'm not in the way you are. But in my little way of, thinking about things, I think about things, but it's not visual. That's why the guy who coined the term aphantasia doesn't have aphantasia. And the reason you can tell is because that is a terrible name for it. Because what it means literally is without imagination.
Oh, okay.
And I have an imagination.
And then some.
It's just not a visual imagination. It's a blind mind's eye. It's image-free imagination, which I know doesn't make sense.
Because the word, image is the root word of imagination. So you can see why he called it that, or why he says it's the lack of imagination. He means the lack of mental imagery. That's fair. But imagination meaning creatively thinking of something that hasn't actually happened. You have that in spades.
When I first heard someone describe aphantasia as not having an imagination, my defenses went up, and I strongly disagreed with that description. This is because, like so many of us, I had my own interpretation of what that word meant, and apparently I was very attached to it. My imagination and my aphantasia have been part of my life for as long as I can remember. Because I grew up with my own understanding and interpretation of what it meant to have an imagination, it was somewhat jarring to hear someone say that I didn't have one, just because I have aphantasia. However, today I would like to soften my stance on the issue. As I have continued to interview more and more people on this podcast and elsewhere, I have obtained a greater realization and understanding of what others mean when they use that word. To them, imagination is a whole other world where they can visualize and explore and taste and smell and touch and hear. I mean, on some level, I always knew that, But now I have a greater and more profound understanding of what that means. So with that deeper understanding and context, it's true. I definitely do not have an imagination in that way.
When you pull up memories, what do you see?
Nothing. I have memories, but they're not visual.
So the last time you did stand-up, or let's say you got a stand-up, a gig coming up, let's say, and you can't picture yourself on the stage getting ready or presenting the material, or?
Not at all.
That's wild.
So what I do is I have a set, I have my jokes. I type them up and I print them out and I read them over and over and over and over again until I feel like I have them somewhat memorized. And then I stand up and pretend something is my microphone and I just do it over and 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 over.
That's a lot.
And until hopefully I feel comfortable that it's going to stick. But as far as any visual help, I have nothing to rely on.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's hats off to you, man. That's a lot of work. It is cheating. I'm cheating through life, man. That's
one of my overarching messages with talking about this and telling people about it is every one of us is beautifully unique, 100% unique. And these little details really shine a light on that. And I think it can help us be, just more patient and understanding with other people, realizing that, hey, they're not having the same experience I'm having, and maybe be a little more patient with people.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's interesting. Like there's a kid in my neighborhood that was born without any arms, and his one arm kind of is a finger, but that's about it. And he's learned to function in the world being that way. So I just think it's interesting. Like you've learned to manage and do well, and without the ability to have the cheat sheets, if you will, or the imagination. So it's interesting the more I think about it. So you just learn to cope. You don't know any different.
Yeah. I didn't know for 20 something years, I had no idea I was any different. And there's other people that go their whole lives without realizing it. So we're able to function fine in society, right? But it does shine a light on certain things like, oh, now I understand why I do this way, or I am not as good at this as other people, or, those kind of things. It kind of helps you understand, oh, that's why.
Have you ever been frustrated by it? Or have people been frustrated with you because of it?
Yes, both.
Okay.
When I didn't know about it, I couldn't identify the frustrations were there, but I didn't know why they were there. And once I became aware of it, I mean, the first thing is just like I was jealous. I was like, that's not fair. Like I want to be able to do that, right? I was kind of jealous of it. And as far as other people being frustrated with me, I mean, yeah, people are always frustrated with me. But specifically, I can talk about math, right? I can't do math. It doesn't compute, right? And yeah, teachers, my parents, my wife, everybody who has tried to help me with math, certainly frustrated. And same thing with reading. Growing up, my parents and my siblings, everybody, big readers, that was a big thing. They're always talking about books. And I just could never get into them. Like, I don't know what it is, but I don't like reading. And again, oh, okay, now I know why I don't like reading. And now I understand why other people do, right? If you're having this beautiful, moving your mind with all this stuff, yeah, that would be cool. To me, it's just words on a page. So no thanks. I'll watch the movie.
Yeah, I could see that. I could totally see that. So does it affect your cravings for things like a sundae ice cream or, whatever, fill in the blank?
Yes. Yeah, I think it does, especially compared to my wife. Like when I ask her the chocolate chip cookie question I asked you earlier, it always makes her really want a chocolate chip cookie. It entices all of these feelings because she's visualizing it, she's tasting it, she's smelling it. So now she wants one. Since I'm not having any of those experiences, it doesn't make me want a chocolate chip cookie any more than, well, sure, I like chocolate chip. Sure, if you have one, I'll have it. But it doesn't. Yeah, it does affect that. I don't think I have the same experience as other people. Like, people talk about their mouth watering and stuff like that. Like, that doesn't happen to me.
Yeah.
I don't even really know what that means. I thought that was a figure of speech too.
If someone would come up and say, "Hey, Shane, remember that time when we, yada, yada, yada." Do you remember those times?
Yes.
Okay.
It's happening in my brain. It's just not visual. But in my distant, vague way of thinking, I can think about the memory.
Okay.
But there's no way, like you talk about, being able to search your mind. There's nothing like that for me. It's a deep, dark, empty void, and things either come to my mind or they don't, and I have no way of describing how or why they even come or don't.
Yeah.
It's very mysterious in a lot of ways. That's why I have a hard time describing it. It's because I don't even really know how it works. It's a hard thing to put. It's hard to even really put my finger on it, exactly what's happening. I would describe my mind as quiet and dark. One time I told a girl about this, and her immediate question was, so how do you think? In her mind, thinking is attached to visualization. She doesn't understand how they could be separated.
If you're not visualizing things, then it's just a bunch of numbers and words in your head.
Kind of, but it's very distant and very vague. It's not loud or intrusive in any way. It's pretty quiet. When discussing aphantasia with people, many of them want me to have a replacement. If it's not an image or a sound, what is it? In this case, Justin wanted to replace it with words and numbers. That's not quite right, as I have never really thought about my thoughts in that way. It's more than just words or numbers. It's more like my thoughts exist in all the same ways yours does. I just can't see them. For example, when I quote-unquote imagine an apple, I'm not just thinking about the word apple. I'm thinking of an actual apple. I just can't see it. And since the thought is lacking an image, it's vague and not very detailed. When I'm thinking of a song, I'm not just thinking of the words of the song, but also about how it sounds, the instruments, the vocals, etc. All of those things are in the thoughts. I just don't hear them. That may not make sense, but that is kind of what it's like. To me, a thought is something that contains all of the ingredients and knowledge about a thing, but without any of the senses involved. That is why I'm liking this idea of accepting that I don't have an imagination. Whatever that is, whatever other people are experiencing in their imaginations, is a separate entity that I do not have, that does not exist for me.
Well, can I ask you a few questions?
Sure.
So on that note, like just as you're saying that, because I used to do ad writing and TV and advertising and things like that too, a lot of print things too. So, I'm just seeing this paper and you just change the font to, the size of the font or the type of the font and, zoom it in and out, all these things to make it fit in that space. And I'm doing all of that visually. So how is it that you do what you do without visualizing things? I mean, do you just know a size 12 font, you can fit this many words on a space this big? Like, is it all logical? If you don't visualize any of it, how do you No.
Yeah, a lot of it at this point is logical. I've done it so many times that I just know certain things just in a logical way. But as far as visualizing it, I don't. That part has to happen in real life. I've got to get it up on my screen and see it. And once I can see it, then it's, I can do all the stuff. I can change the colors. I can move things around. I can experiment with it. But I just can't do any of that in my mind. I can do it very vaguely. Like I can have some vague ideas. Okay, what about this? And then I do it on the screen. And then at that point, I realize it's either a good idea or a bad idea, right? Like, oh, that's not going to work, or that looks great, right? But I don't know that until I do it, until I can see it. Everything else in my mind is more distant and vague and not really nailed down.
So what about things that you're very, very familiar with? Like when you remember or have a memory of like your wedding day or your children's birth or a birthday party, or even just seeing them at their last visit, when you recall that experience, can you like remember and see the color of the shirt that they were wearing or the way their hair was styled or, things like that? Like none of that comes back in your mind? Like
not those details. What people were wearing, those kind of things, those are gone forever in my brain.
Really?
But I do have memories. Again, I would describe them as kind of distant and vague. Like I can remember the moment each of my children were born. There's no visual. And
what is it if it's not visual?
Right. This is where I have a hard time explaining it. And the best way I have come up with to describe it is a computer without a monitor. Right? The computer that has a brain, right? That's where all the thinking happens. That's where all the ones and zeros are. That's where it happens. The monitor represents the visual aspect of the computer, right? So my mind still works. It's just not visual. All of the thinking, the memories, the dreams, all of the things we're talking about here, I still have it. It's just not visual. So how do you describe what's going on inside a computer? It's really hard to describe, right? Especially if you don't have a monitor or speakers or anything to bring it out. So that's where I really do have a hard time explaining it, because to me, it's thoughts, right? I describe them as thoughts. But to people whose thoughts are visual, that doesn't make any sense, right? What do you mean? How do you think without an image? I don't know, but I do.
I know. So if I asked you to describe your wife, what mental process would you go through to do that? You think hair color, check, that's blonde or brown or what? I'm sorry, I don't know what color your wife's hair is. Eye color, like, are you bringing it up like a spreadsheet in your mind that you are just have a list of attributes and characteristics of her that you would use to describe her?
Again, it's not that detailed. I can tell you're a very logical thinker, and so you're thinking, oh, maybe you can do it. Yeah. It's much less structured than that, and I have to really think about it. In fact, when you said think of the characteristics of your wife or whatever, my first instinct was to turn and to look at a picture I have of her right here, because I didn't see that, right?
Yeah.
To think about it is harder. But I can. I mean, I can come up with some of the details because I know them.
Yeah.
But again, it's not visual. So again, it's hard to describe. I don't know really how, other than I just think about it. Like, okay, what color hair does she have? Well, right now, it's kind of blondish with reddish in it. Right? If she let it go, it'd probably be gray, to be honest with you.
That's really funny.
So yeah, it's distant and vague. It's all there, but it's not like in front of me. It's like it's in another room or something. I hope these discussions and explanations have helped you better understand what is happening in my mind. Honestly, I don't really understand it myself, which is why I usually end up using words like mysterious, distant, vague, void, and nothing. It really is not only difficult to explain, but to understand, even for me. Maybe someday I'll have better explanations, but for now, this is what I've got. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, follow, and engage with us, and share it with your friends and family as we continue to explore this fascinating subject. For additional information about this episode or Shane's Brain, check out the show notes. Thanks for listening to the Discovering Your Mind podcast. You are beautifully unique.